Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Welcome back to the desk corner. This is a kind of weird angle. So before we get into today's video, let me just quickly explain the purpose of it. So if you are new to graphite pencils and you want to learn a bit more about the basic techniques for, as it relates to realistic drawing, what is that? And it's also going to be useful for those of you who want to touch up on your graphite skills, or maybe you're struggling with graphite, so you want to go back to the basics and practice your fundamentals and techniques. If you are interested in more videos related to graphite, I have a couple more and I will link them down in the description in case you want to check them out later. And also, I recently created a video comparing graphite to charcoal. So if you're interested in that, I'll link that up above. A lot of you are probably already familiar with this grade scale, so if you've ever bought a graphite pencil set before, you know that they come in a range from H pencils to B pencils. The H pencils are harder, so H stands for hardness. The higher the number, the harder and lighter the pencil gets. I also will say that these pencils tend to be really sharp and create more of an indentation in the paper. The B pencils stand for blackness. The higher the number is, the softer and darker the pencils are. Now, even though it stands for blackness, I have to say that most B pencils, even the highest in the set, will not be very close to the black you will get with a charcoal pencil or anything like that, so be aware of that. My set of graphite pencils goes from 2H to 8B, and they vary depending on the set, so you might have a slightly different range. The 2H pencil is the hardest pencil in my set. It takes me forever to fill in this box with the 2H pencil because H pencils are not as suitable for shading. They're better for things like line work. If you're going to be doing more realistic work and shading, you don't necessarily really need to have H pencils in your set. Now, the HB pencil, on the other hand, is actually really good for sketching and shading. It is a mix between H and B. So it's not too light, not too dark, and you can still blend it. It's not something that is hard to blend. The B pencil and the 2B pencil are also two pencils I'd recommend buying if you're buying open stock. These are very important to have. They are great mid-range pencils that you can use for most of your shading work. Now, the rest of the B pencils I have in this set are kind of just there for convenience, but to be completely honest, you don't really need to buy a whole set that has the entire range of B pencils if you don't want to. You can actually just buy the darkest in the set and then maybe a mid-range, like a 4B, and then a B or 2B and an HB, and that's what I would recommend if you don't want to buy an entire set. Keep in mind the 8B pencil, and that's the highest in this set, not all sets, but the 8B pencil is not going to be black. You might need to supplement your set with charcoal or something like that if you want more contrast. When you're new to graphite pencils, I'd recommend practicing how you hold your pencil and how much pressure you use and everything, because you can go really wrong with this. So in the first circle, I'm using the side of the pencil, then the tip of the pencil, and creating all these uneven streaks, and it's not going to be a nice result if you go to shade that out. So I would say that that's way too uneven. In the second circle, I'm going to use the tip of the pencil and press really, really hard and show you what would happen. So you don't want to do this. You only want to use the tip of your pencil if you're doing like detail work and things like that. If you're shading a larger area, of course, you do not want to use the tip of your pencil and press really hard. You don't want to use a ton of pressure. Then in the third circle, I'm going to practice using the side of my pencil and using much less pressure, and instead of just pressing really hard at once, I'm going to go layer by layer and create nice even layers, one on top of the other, until I achieve the result I want. And this type of shading is way more suitable for blending and realistic work. If you were to go and blend this out after, it would look much, much nicer, and you won't get as much graphite shine either because you haven't pressed hard on the paper. The next exercise you can do to practice is creating a value scale or like a gradient, and not using all of your pencils or pencils that are right next to each other in the value scale necessarily. So I am using an HB pencil, and then I believe a 2B or a B, a 4B, and an 8B, and creating an entire range of values just with those 4 pencils. I recommend practicing this, especially if you are not planning on buying a whole set and you're just getting a few pencils. This can show you that you can get any value just with a few pencils, as long as you have those extremes on the value scale and a couple of really good mid-range pencils. You don't need an entire like 12 set of graphite pencils, and this kind of just shows you that that is the case. Now let's talk about a couple different methods for blending. So first I'm going to shade these rectangles in the same way we already talked about, nice even pressure throughout and creating a gradient as well. I'm going to do that in all 3 rectangles, and then I'm going to show you guys what you can do after you're done building up layers and when you're ready to actually blend out your graphite pencils. By the way, I don't recommend you use your finger to smudge out the graphite because you can create these like smudges and get whatever's on your finger onto the paper, but if it's all you have, of course you can do that, and if you don't mind that, I would just recommend maybe covering your finger with a tissue if you were to do so. And I am going to go over how you can blend with a tissue in this as well. So in the first rectangle, I'm using a Q-tip, which you can see that blends out really nicely as long as you go from light to dark so you don't drag the dark, of course, values to the light side. In the second rectangle, I'm using this blending stump that comes in a lot of graphite sets, and I would have to say it's not as great for getting rid of all the lines as a Q-tip would be. I also used a little tortillon at the bottom for kind of that little corner, which is kind of just like a mini blending stump. And in the third rectangle, this is the easiest way to blend. I just used a tissue and quickly blended it out, and that really gets rid of all the lines very easily. And I like to use this for larger areas and a Q-tip for like a smaller area, and maybe a blending stump or tortillon for a detail area. Now the main point of this video is I wanted to get to this demonstration because I feel that it might be more useful than just doing these examples, the very like beginner examples in circles and squares. It's kind of more useful to also apply that to an actual realistic drawing and practice that. Now, when I am starting to shade this pear, I am shading in the direction that the pear curves, which I think is pretty important to do. So I'm using a B value pencil, as you can see, and picking out some of those more shadowed areas. I'm using the side of the pencil and trying to shade somewhat evenly. But this is just my first layer, and we are going to blend out and add a lot more layers. So the very first layer, you're just picking out where your shadows go, leaving where your highlights are. Now don't worry too much. You can use an eraser, like a kneaded eraser, to pick out highlighted areas after you blend, because when you blend, you sometimes go over the highlights. So don't worry too much about that. As long as you're not using a lot of pencil pressure, an eraser will pick up a lot of the graphite if you need to use it. Now I'm starting to slowly build up more B using an 8B pencil in those really dark areas. I'm still not pressing very hard or creating any kind of harsh outline around the pear. I'm just focusing on shading in the correct direction that the pear sort of curves in, and also picking out those highlighted and shadowed areas. As I build up more and more layers in the darker shadowed regions, I can put a little more pencil pressure, but nothing extremely like harsh. And then I go and use a tissue to blend out, and you can see that that is a really easy way to blend out. The darkest areas, I'm using my tortillon to blend out, and I will be using a couple different shading methods just to show you guys that you can really use whichever shading method you want. So I'm going to be using a Q-tip, a tissue, and then my tortillon as well. So after blending out, of course, you just keep adding layer after layer. I'm still not adding a lot of pressure though. I still want to be gentle and I don't want to create any kind of harsh lines. And then I go in and blend out with a tissue, and now everything looks a little bit too flat. So I want to go in with an eraser and pick out some highlights. When you do that though, you need to soften the highlights out afterwards, kind of use a tissue to smudge it around a little bit. And graphite moves around a lot. It's not the same as something like colored pencil, which takes a lot of work to blend, a lot of work to layer, and you have to be really careful with each pencil stroke. Whereas with graphite, you don't have to be as careful. You want to create, of course, evenness, and you don't want to press too hard. But when you go to blend out, the graphite is going to move around on the page a bit. It's almost like a powder. You can buy graphite in a powdered form, and when you blend it out, it moves around and spreads around the paper and creates a really nice smooth blend, so you don't have to worry as much. Graphite is a lot easier to blend than something like colored pencil is. And as I'm kind of building up more and more value in this pear, you can start to see it's looking more and more 3D because I'm using my 8B pencil. Don't be afraid to use your darkest pencil. You should be using that pencil a lot because with graphite, you don't have any black pencil. I know some sets come with a B pencil that is pretty close to being black. This particular set doesn't, and a lot of sets don't. So don't be afraid to use the 8B or whichever is the highest B pencil. I think it really adds more depth, and I like to have even more depth than this. I like to incorporate charcoal or carbon or a very dark pencil into my graphite work usually, but for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to do that because I'm assuming that a lot of people don't have a supplemental pencil. Now I'm going to zoom on this because I kind of want to show you guys how you can shade in a different way. I'm using a really loose cross-hatching technique. You'll notice in this video I didn't go over like hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, and all that because really I tend to just do more like soft blending and then blending out with tissue or a Q-tip and then creating like circular pencil strokes or normal strokes. I don't really use any particular method like this, but I am going to show you guys how you can use loose hatching, loose cross hatching for certain areas like the stem of the pear here. The cross hatching technique using the tip of the pencil came in handy to create a different sort of texture. If you want texture differences, use different methods of shading. For the shadow, I'm going to use a really loose hatching technique where I kind of contour so the hatching is not completely straight. It kind of rounds with the shape of the shadow. But basically hatching is when you kind of just create lines as shading, nothing too harsh or sharp, just soft lines, and then you can blend that out later. And cross hatching, of course, is when you cross lines over so you have a horizontal and a vertical line. And it's not really something I use very often for realistic work, but I do want to show you that you can incorporate this into your drawings to create different textures, and it's useful also for things like in nature, maybe like tree bark or maybe clothing. If you're doing a portrait, you don't always have to shade the exact same way. The shadow, the cast shadow, which is that shadow underneath the pear that's on the surface of whatever the pear is sitting on, even if it's a little bit the wrong shape, it can totally throw off what it looks like. Just keep that in mind as well. And then at the end here, I just go in and kind of label what I did. For the pear, for the most part, I just used regular shading, and it was only the cast shadow and the stem that I attempted to incorporate some different methods of shading into my drawing. I'm going to do some detail work now with the tip of my pencil. You want to do detail work last, of course, in this case, so that you don't accidentally blend it all out and have to redo it. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. I hope that this demonstration and video overall was helpful for you, and even if you're not completely new to graphite, if you want to like polish up your skills a little bit and just, you know, get better at creating value and blending and shading and everything like that, that's really the important fundamentals to graphite drawing. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and definitely leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the video. If you want me to create more graphite related videos, let me know. Now that I've said all that, I feel like I don't really know how to properly end my videos, so I'm just gonna kind of like go back to